Have you ever felt like the world was too heavy to carry on your own, or like your heart was cracked open by years of loss and unspoken emotions? I did, but on the day my brother's son reached out, something unexpected happened. I found a bridge I didn't even know I needed. This story will stay with me forever. A moment of connection, healing, and realization that sometimes the people we least expect are the ones who change everything. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It had been a rough year, the kind that makes you feel like you're walking through life with a stone lodged in your chest, too heavy to move, but too familiar to ignore. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you know that feeling of just barely holding on. There were days I wondered if the weight would ever let up. It was a Sunday afternoon when the message came, out of the blue. I hadn't heard from him in months, and to be honest, I didn't expect to. My nephew, Daniel, my brother's only son. He and I hadn't been close. I didn't know what to make of him most of the time. He was always quiet, always distant. A boy who grew up too fast, or at least that's how it seemed. But this message, it shook me. Hey, Aunt Emma, I've been thinking about you. Can I call you later? I think I have something to say. I stared at the screen for a while, the words blinking back at me. It wasn't just the message itself that caught my attention. It was the simplicity of it. I've been thinking about you. How often do we get a message like that from someone? From anyone? It hit me in the chest like a wave I didn't see coming. A feeling I hadn't realized I was missing until it hit me full force. I don't know what I expected when I picked up the phone later that afternoon. Maybe a quick hello. Maybe some polite chit-chat about life. But when I heard his voice, it was different. There was something raw in it. Something unguarded. Aunt Emma, he started, a pause hanging in the air like he wasn't sure how to begin. Hi, I don't know if this is the right time, but I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry. I blinked at the words, sitting there in the quiet of my living room, the dull hum of the refrigerator, the only noise filling the space. Sorry? For what? He hadn't done anything to me. I didn't understand. Sorry for what, Daniel? I asked, my voice sounding too soft, almost unsure. For not being there, you know. His words came out in a rush. For not being the nephew I should have been when you needed family the most. I felt the air leave my lungs. The memories rushed in like a tide. It had been years since I'd heard someone acknowledge what was left unsaid in our family. I tried to push back the tears, but they came anyway, slow and uninvited. You're talking about Tad, right? I said, my voice cracking on the words. About when your grandfather passed away? There was a long pause. Daniel's voice wavered when he spoke again. Yeah, I should have reached out then. I should have. I don't know. Done something. But I didn't. And I guess I didn't know how to be there for you. I closed my eyes, the weight of everything he said settling over me. So much had happened in those years since my brother's death. The loss had hit me hard, but what had made it worse was the feeling that I had to carry that grief alone. My brother had been gone, and in some ways, his son had too. Daniel had been quiet in the face of it all. Distant, like he wasn't sure where he fit in the picture. And I had been too stubborn, too proud to reach out to him, even though I knew how much he had been hurting. I didn't know what to say either, Daniel. I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't want to make things worse. He sighed, a sound of relief more than anything else. It's not about making things worse. It's just, I don't know, Aunt Emma. I feel like we've both been carrying this for too long, and maybe it's time to put it down. There was something in those words that cracked something open inside of me. I hadn't realized just how much I had been carrying. until it was laid bare between us. The grief, the regret, the longing for connection that we had both been too afraid to reach for. "I don't know how to fix it," he said softly, "but I want to try. I don't want to leave things like this between us." I swallowed hard, feeling that same weight lift ever so slightly. "Neither do I said. "I don't want to leave it like this either." And in that moment, as simple as it was, I felt a shift. A sense of possibility, like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for us both after all. Later that day, we talked about more than just the past. We talked about life, his job, his plans, the things he'd been thinking about. And though there was a long way to go, there was something in the air now. Something softer, a quiet understanding that hadn't been there before. I didn't know it then, but that conversation, simple and unexpected as it was, would change me. It would change both of us. Sometimes it's the people we least expect who step into our lives at just the right moment. And maybe, just maybe, that's how healing really begins. It was a few weeks after that conversation when I found myself thinking back on the changes that had started unfolding between Daniel and me. It wasn't anything grand. There were no big gestures or dramatic reconciliations. But there was something softer in the air now, something less awkward and more comfortable. I hadn't expected it to feel like this. It was like we were learning how to speak to each other, not just with words, but with something deeper, something unspoken. It started with small things, a few more messages, a phone call here and there. He told me about his work, about the things that made him laugh or frustrated him. I began to hear the tone of his voice shift, just a little, from the guardedness I had grown used to something more vulnerable. I found myself sharing more too, about my life, my memories, the things I'd been holding on to for so long. For the first time in years, I realized I was seen again, not just as the aunt who had watched him grow up, but as a person in my own right, as someone who mattered. That's the thing about family. We think we know each other so well, but sometimes the distance we put between ourselves and the people closest to us makes us blind to the small shifts happening underneath the surface. One evening, as the last light of day was starting to fade outside, Daniel called again. I could hear the sound of wind through the phone, and for a moment it made me think of the long road trips we used to take as a family when the kids were younger. There was always a mix of excitement and tension on those trips, like we were all a little too close, but we were family, so that closeness was somehow okay. "Hey, Aunt Emma," Daniel said, breaking my train of thought. "I've been thinking. I know we don't usually talk about this stuff, but I wanted to ask you something. It's kind of personal." I raised an eyebrow, my curiosity piqued. "Personal?" I repeated. "Well, now you've got my attention." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, as though he was trying to decide how much to share. "It's about Dad," he said, and for a moment I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "I've been thinking a lot about him lately. About the way things were, you know." I felt a lump in my throat. My brother's name had been a quiet ghost in the background of our conversations. Neither of us had ever really gone there, not until that day, not until he'd apologized. It was too hard, too painful. But I could hear in his voice now that it wasn't something he could bury anymore. I swallowed, steadying myself. "What about him, Daniel?" I asked softly. "I don't know," he said, his voice cracking slightly. I think I never really understood him. And now, looking back, I feel like there's so much I missed. Like I didn't even know him as well as I thought. I could feel my chest tighten. I had been there too, wondering if I had truly understood my brother, if I had truly seen all the sides of him before he passed. The regrets, the could-have-beens, the questions that never had answers. "I get that," I said quietly, knowing there were no easy words for this kind of pain. It's like, when someone's gone, You don't realize how much you didn't understand about them until they're not there to explain themselves anymore." He was silent for a moment, and I could hear the wind picking up again, rustling in the background. I guess I always thought he was just, well, you know, Dad. But now, I wonder if there were parts of him that he never got to show us, or maybe we never knew how to ask. I closed my eyes, leaning back into the chair, letting his words settle. I thought about my brother, how he had always been so distant, so focused on taking care of everything, yet so afraid of letting anyone in. He had been a man of quiet strength, but at times it felt like he was just pretending to have it all together. "I think we were all too afraid to ask," I said finally. "Too afraid of breaking the illusion that we were all fine, when none of us really were. Not your father, not me." Another pause. Then Daniel spoke, his voice softer. "I wish I had known that. I wish I'd known it was okay to ask." I nodded, even though I knew he couldn't see me. "We all wish that, kid, but we didn't know how to say it. Not then. Not before things changed." A long silence followed, the kind that hung in the air heavy with things we both wanted to say, but didn't know how. Then, as if he had gathered some courage, Daniel said, "I've been thinking about coming to visit you. Maybe for the weekend. You know, just catch up, talk about things. I don't know when, but I think it would be good for both of us." I felt a surge of warmth, a sense of something opening up between us. The idea of him visiting was unexpected, but it felt right. It felt like another small step forward. And after everything we'd been through, everything unsaid and left to settle in the silence, it felt like something we both needed. "You don't have to ask, Daniel," I said, my voice more steady now. "You're always welcome here. You know that." We talked for a few more minutes after that, mostly about trivial things, what he'd been up to, what I'd been reading, the usual small talk. But underneath it all, I could sense something shifting, something coming into place. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like there might be something real, waiting for us on the other side of the silence. Something that could finally heal the broken pieces of both our hearts. When we hung up, I sat there for a moment, just listening to the hum of my house, the faint sounds of traffic outside, and the soft rhythm of my own heartbeat. The world hadn't changed in any drastic way, but in that brief conversation, in those few words shared between us, something had. Something deep. And though it was just a beginning, it was enough. The weekend Daniel came to visit, I found myself cleaning the house in a way I hadn't done in ages. Not because it was dirty, but because I suddenly felt the need to create a space for something new, something I couldn't fully understand yet but could feel coming. I dusted the corners of the living room, wiped down the windows, and even put fresh flowers on the kitchen table, though I wasn't exactly sure why. Maybe it was a subconscious attempt to make things feel more welcoming, more alive. It was strange how much I had come to care about the small details in these moments. I didn't know what to expect when he arrived. Would it be awkward? Would we sit in silence, too unsure of what to say? Or would we finally be able to talk about the things that had been sitting between us, hidden beneath the surface for so many years? The doorbell rang at exactly 3:00 p.m., the time we'd agreed on. I straightened up from where I had been adjusting the curtains, feeling a flutter of nerves in my stomach. I took a deep breath, wiped my palms on my jeans, and walked to the door. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there, looking a little older than I remembered, but still very much the same. His hair was longer than the last time I saw him, and he was wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans. There was a nervousness in his eyes, but also something softer, something that I hadn't seen before. "Hey, Aunt Emma," he said, his voice warm but with a hint of hesitation. I hope this is okay. I wasn't sure what you'd be up for, so I didn't want to, overwhelm you." "Of course it's okay," I said, smiling as I stepped aside to let him in. "I'm glad you're here." I didn't know what it was about him being here that made everything feel different, but the moment he stepped into my home, I felt like something had shifted. The space felt smaller, more intimate, like it was only the two of us now, facing whatever came next. It wasn't just a visit. It was the beginning of something else, a reconnection that we had both been yearning for, whether we realized it or not. We sat down at the kitchen table, the same one we had shared countless meals around when he was younger. It looked the same, but everything felt different now, like we were no longer just aunt and nephew, but two people who had to learn how to see each other again. I poured us both some coffee, something I usually did whenever someone came over, but this time I took a little longer, letting the silence between us grow just a bit before I finally spoke. "So," I said, trying to break the ice, "how's work going?" Daniel smiled faintly, but I could tell he was a little uncomfortable. "Same as usual," he said, his voice more casual than before. "Nothing exciting, really. Just trying to stay busy. You know how it is." "I do," I said, nodding. "Sometimes it feels like we're all just trying to stay busy so we don't have to think about the things we'd rather avoid. But you're right, it's a way to get by." He looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing his next words. "Yeah, I guess I've been doing that for a while now. Trying to keep my mind off everything." I sensed there was more there, but I didn't press him. Not yet. Instead, I let the conversation flow naturally, letting it move into safer territory. We talked about the weather, about a new book I'd been reading, about the state of the world. Small talk, but it was a way to get used to being in each other's company again. After a while, the tension in the room began to fade, little by little. And then, as if he couldn't hold it in any longer, Daniel spoke again, this time with a quiet urgency that made me stop mid-sentence. "Aunt Emma," he said, his voice quieter now, "I've been thinking about something, and I think I need to tell you." I looked at him, waiting for him to continue. His face was open now, vulnerable. He had dropped the walls, and I could see him for who he truly was in that moment, a young man, still grappling with his own emotions, still trying to figure out where he belonged. "I've been carrying a lot of guilt, you know," he said, his voice trembling just slightly, "for not being there for you after Dad died. I was so wrapped up in my own pain that I didn't even think about how hard it must have been for you. And then, when you were going through your grief, I couldn't be there. I couldn't help. And that. It's been eating at me." The words hung in the air between us, thick with everything unsaid. I felt a sharp pang in my chest. It was the same guilt I had carried for so long, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, if I had reached out to him sooner, things could have been different. But the truth was, I had been so wrapped up in my own grief that I couldn't see beyond it. "I'm sorry too," I said, my voice steady, but my heart aching. "I should have reached out, Daniel. I should have been more open, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to ask for help." His eyes softened, and I could see the understanding passing between us. For the first time, I felt like we were truly meeting each other halfway, no longer just aunt and nephew, but two people who had suffered in their own ways, both carrying the weight of things unsaid. "I think we both had a lot to learn," he said, his voice gentle. "But we're here now, right? And maybe that's all we can do." I nodded, fighting back the tears that were threatening to rise. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Maybe that's enough." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of shared stories and laughter, of sitting on the couch with cups of tea, reminiscing about the old days when life was simpler, and our family felt whole. The weight that had hung between us for so long, unspoken, unresolved, slowly began to lift, not with one big gesture, but with the small moments of connection we were building. Slowly, steadily, we were finding our way back to each other. And as the night wore on, I realized something profound. It wasn't the big moments that mattered most. It was these quiet, tender moments, the ones where we learned to see each other again, to forgive, and to begin again, that would shape us. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. There was a new kind of bond forming between Daniel and me, one that had nothing to do with blood or obligation, but everything to do with understanding, compassion, and the willingness to start fresh. I wasn't sure what the future would bring, but for the first time in years, I was no longer afraid to face it, together. The following months passed in what felt like a dream, a slow unfolding that I wasn't entirely prepared for, but somehow, with each passing day, seemed to make more sense. There were still days when I felt the weight of the past pressing in, old habits, old pains that refused to fade, but there was something new too, something I hadn't expected, a quiet understanding between Daniel and me, a bond that had started to grow without us fully realizing it, until it was already there, nestled in the spaces between our conversations and our silences. Daniel kept visiting on weekends. Each time he arrived, I felt a little less like I was simply his aunt, and a little more like I was simply Emma. We talked more openly now, not always about the hard stuff, but about the little things that made life feel real. How his job was going, what books he was reading, the ways he was finding joy despite the quiet weight of life. He had a way of laughing now that felt less guarded, more at ease, and it made me realize how much time we had spent not laughing together in the past. But it wasn't just his laughter that shifted things. It was the way he looked at me when we talked, as if he was seeing me for the first time, not just as the person I used to be in his life, but as someone who had lived a life outside of him, outside of the family. And in turn, I found myself doing the same. It wasn't just about his past, or my past, or the people we had lost. It was about the present, the way we were rebuilding something neither of us had thought could be rebuilt. One Sunday afternoon, as the autumn leaves fluttered outside my kitchen window, Daniel showed up with a small cardboard box in hand. It wasn't much, just a simple, taped-up box, but there was something about it that immediately caught my attention. "Hey, Aunt Emma," he said, looking a little unsure of himself. "I found something when I was going through Dad's old things, and I think it's something you should have." I blinked at him, not fully understanding. "What is it?" He set the box down on the table, his fingers lingering on the lid for a moment before he lifted it. Inside, there was a bundle of old photographs, worn at the edges, yellowing with time. I recognized them immediately. They were the pictures of when Daniel was a kid, pictures I hadn't seen in years, not since before everything had changed, before my brother's death. "You kept these?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Yeah," Daniel said, his eyes softening. "I guess I never knew what to do with them. I always thought you should have them. You and Dad were close. And well, I think it's time you saw them again." I reached into the box and pulled out the first photograph. It was of Daniel and me when he was about 5, both of us laughing in the backyard, the sun just beginning to set behind us. My brother had been behind the camera, capturing moments like these, moments that had felt so ordinary back then, but now felt like precious treasures. For a long moment, I just stared at the photograph, letting the memories wash over me. My brother's voice, his dry sense of humor, the way he always tried to hide his emotions behind his work. I had forgotten what it felt like to be close to him in that way. "Do you remember this day?" Daniel asked quietly, his voice carrying a trace of nostalgia. I smiled, a bittersweet smile. "I do. It was one of those perfect days when everything felt right. Your dad was grilling in the backyard, and we spent the whole afternoon just laughing." Daniel nodded, his gaze distant for a moment. "I remember that, but I didn't realize until later how much you and Dad did for me, for us." My heart clenched at his words. "You don't need to apologize, Daniel. Your dad did the best he could. We all did, in our own ways." He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine. "I know, But that's the thing, Aunt Emma. We don't always see it at the time, you know. We don't always see the people who are trying to help us, the ones who are carrying their own weight while carrying ours too. I swallowed, the lump in my throat growing bigger. We were all doing the best we could, even if it didn't always feel like enough. For the first time, I saw Daniel see me in a way he hadn't before. Not just as the woman who had been his aunt, but as someone who had lived through her own losses, her own battles, and had kept going despite it all. And I saw myself seeing him too, not just as the nephew who had pulled away, but as a young man who had carried his own silent burdens, a man who was learning to speak about them, to reach out when it mattered. We spent the next few hours going through the photos together, remembering things we hadn't thought about in years. We laughed over old jokes my brother had made, shared stories of moments that had faded with time. And even though I knew we could never go back to the way things were before, there was something comforting in that shared space. It was the kind of healing that doesn't happen in big, dramatic moments, but in the quiet, gentle acts of connection that happen when we let our guard down and allow ourselves to be seen. As the afternoon stretched into evening, I found myself feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from having all the answers or from knowing the past could be rewritten. It was the kind of peace that comes from acceptance, from knowing that sometimes the journey is more about the steps forward than the ones we've already taken. And as Daniel got ready to leave, he turned to me and said, "I'm really glad we're doing this, Aunt Emma. I don't think I ever really realized how much I missed this. I missed us." I smiled, a warm, genuine smile that felt like it belonged to me again. "Me too, Daniel. Me too." And as he walked out the door, I didn't feel that familiar ache in my chest. I didn't feel the weight of all the things we hadn't said. I felt something lighter, something hopeful. The future, no longer a question mark, but a promise, one we could face together, one small step at a time. That's the thing about healing, I suppose. It doesn't always come in grand gestures or loud proclamations. Sometimes it comes in the quiet moments between two people who have been through the storm and are just starting to realize that they don't have to face it alone anymore. And that, I think, is the greatest gift of all.